I stood in the middle of a lavish banquet hall in Atlanta, the dim glow of the lights casting a triumphant sheen on my younger brother Jake's face. Today was our father's 60th birthday, but it was also the day I, Tyler Lawson, was ousted by my own family from the company I had poured 10 years of my heart and soul into building. Lawson BBQ, once a humble shop in Georgia, was now a $50 million empire, but I was branded a has-been in front of hundreds of guests. My father nodded in approval. My heart shattered. I left quietly without a word of protest, but in the darkness a fire ignited. They would soon tremble at what I would do next. My name is Tyler Lawson, 35 years old, an ordinary man with sun-bleached hair and calloused hands from years of stirring vats of BBQ sauce in an old warehouse on the outskirts of Atlanta. I'm not the type to chase grand dreams in New York or Silicon Valley. My dreams were smaller, more grounded, to keep the family's sauce business, Lawson BBQ, alive. That was where I grew up, where the air was thick with the scent of wood smoke, apple cider vinegar, and chili powder. Where I learned how to live from my father, Henry Lawson, a stern but passionate man. My father wasn't a businessman, he was a craftsman raised in poverty in Georgia, learning the art of making sauce from my grandmother. That recipe, rich, tangy, with a hint of honey's sweetness, was our family's legacy. In 1985, the year I was born, Dad opened Lawson BBQ, a tiny wooden shack off the highway, with a hand-painted sign and a few picnic tables out front. The customers were mostly locals, truckers who'd stop to grab a jar of sauce after a plate of ribs. The money wasn't much, just enough to keep the family afloat. But Dad was proud. "One day, Tyler," he'd say, his eyes gleaming, "this sauce will be all over America." My mother passed away when I was 5, leaving Dad, me, and Jake, my younger brother, who was 3 years my junior. Breast cancer took her so quickly I barely understood what was happening. All I remember is Dad sitting blankly by the sauce pot, eyes red, while I, a quiet kid, helped him measure ingredients. Jake was different. He was too young to remember Mom, but as he grew up, he was always trying to escape the shadow of the shop. "I don't want to smell like smoke my whole life, Tyler," he said at 10, his voice brimming with pride, as if the shop was something beneath him. I didn't blame him. Jake was smart, quick-witted, always dreaming of big cities and skyscrapers. Me? I loved that smoky smell. It was home, family, everything I had. I grew up surrounded by shelves stacked with sauce jars, learning to mix spices before I could write essays. Every afternoon, I'd sit behind the counter watching Dad grin at customers telling stories about the family recipe. "It's special because it's made with love," he'd say, and I believed him. I wanted to protect that smile, protect the shop, protect our family. When I was 18, Jake got accepted into Wharton, the prestigious business school in Philadelphia. Dad was so proud, bragging to the whole neighborhood that Jake's going to do big things. I stayed in Georgia, studying business administration at a local community college. Not because I wasn't good enough to go further, I just didn't want to leave Dad alone. Jake smirked, calling me the one who stayed. I didn't argue. I just wanted to preserve Dad's legacy. At that time, Lawson BBQ was still just a tiny dot on Atlanta's map. The revenue was enough to support Dad and me to cover Jake's tuition at Wharton, but it was never abundant. Dad still stood behind the counter, smiling at customers, but I noticed his back starting to hunch, his smile fading as bills piled up. I didn't want Dad to stop, but I wanted him to live more comfortably. I wanted Lawson BBQ to be more than just a shop. I wanted it to be a name known across the country. So, I began. I refined the sauce recipe, preserving the bold flavor from my grandmother but making it more balanced, just spicy enough, gently sweet, with a lingering hint of wood smoke. I tinkered with packaging to ensure the sauce retained its flavor in glass jars, studying production processes from books borrowed from the library. I didn't have a prestigious degree or mentors, only determination and 16-hour workdays. I convinced Dad to try mass production, though he was wary. "Tyler, we're a small shop. Scaling up like this is risky," he said, his voice full of doubt. I took his hand and promised I'd take responsibility if it failed. He nodded, not because he believed in me, but because he didn't want to disappoint me. I rented a small warehouse, bought secondhand machinery, and started production. Those first few months were a nightmare. The machines broke constantly. The first batch of sauce was returned due to leaking jars, and I slept on the warehouse floor to meet delivery deadlines. But I didn't give up. I cold-called distributors, drove hours to meet supermarket managers, and pitched our family sauce like it was a treasure. One day, after dozens of rejections, Kroger agreed to try 500 jars for their Georgia stores. I came home, hugged Dad, my eyes stinging. "We did it, Dad," I said. He smiled, the first real smile in years, as bright as when I was a kid. From 500 jars, we sold 5,000, then 50,000. Kroger ordered for the entire South. Walmart called, wanting to stock Lawson BBQ in their national supermarket chain. I expanded the warehouse, hired more staff, and built a supply chain. I learned to negotiate with suppliers, manage finances, and handle crises when a shipment went bad. Every night I checked every number, every jar, knowing one small mistake could ruin everything. In 5 years, Lawson BBQ went from a small shop to a food company with $10 million in revenue. Our sauce was in every major supermarket, from California to New York. Customers loved it, calling it the soul of American BBQ. I was proud, not for the money, but because I'd kept my promise to Dad to take our family sauce nationwide. But success didn't bring only joy, it brought pressure. I no longer had time for friends, for love, or for myself. I lived in the office, ate cold sandwiches, and slept on the sofa when I was too exhausted. Dad still went to the old shop, but he spoke less, as if the company's growth made him feel out of place. I wanted him to rest, but he refused. "This is my life, Tyler," he said, his voice tinged with sadness. I didn't understand why, but I felt the distance growing between us. I told myself that as long as the company grew, as long as Dad saw what I'd achieved, everything would be fine. I was wrong. The success I'd built with sweat and tears became the spark that ignited jealousy. And the one who brought that flame was none other than Jake. Jake strode into the new Lawson BBQ office, dressed in a perfectly tailored suit, his hair slicked back as if he'd just stepped out of a Wall Street boardroom. I was reviewing production reports, drenched in sweat after a day at the warehouse. It was 2015, and the company had just hit $1 million in annual revenue, a milestone I hadn't dared to dream of. Jake, 29 years old, had just left his job at a finance firm in New York to return to Atlanta. "I want to help build the family legacy," he said, his voice brimming with confidence. I smiled, thinking that our family was finally reunited. I was wrong. Dad welcomed Jake like a hero. He called him the smart one, flaunting his Wharton MBA like a medal. I wasn't jealous. I was glad Jake was back, hoping he'd help grow the company. But Jake didn't want to work with me, he wanted to lead. On his first day, he proposed a new marketing campaign with a budget twice what we spent on production. "Tyler, we need a big brand, not just sauce," he said, as if the jars of sauce I'd spent years perfecting were insignificant. I pushed back, explaining that we needed to invest in quality first. Jake shrugged, looking at me like I was outdated. That night, Dad called me into his private office. "Tyler, you've done great, but Jake has vision. He studied at Wharton. He knows how to take the company global. You focus on production and let Jake handle strategy." I was stunned. Production? I was the one who built this company, from the recipe to the supply chain, but I didn't argue. I nodded, swallowing the bitterness because I didn't want to upset Dad. The next day, Dad appointed Jake as co-CEO, equal to me, even though he knew nothing about the food industry. I was relegated to head of production and supply chain, a title that sounded like an assistant's. Jake wasted no time asserting his authority. He hired an expensive marketing team, threw lavish events, and appeared in local magazines as the young leader. He talked about innovative vision but rarely visited the warehouse, never asking about the recipe or processes. I worked twice as hard to compensate for his costly decisions, like when he signed a contract with a new distributor without vetting their capacity. causing us to lose thousands of jars due to delayed deliveries. I fixed the mistakes, but no one noticed. Jake got the praise while I got more work. I told myself that as long as the company was stable, as long as Dad was proud, I could endure it. But every time I saw Jake in front of the cameras calling Lawson BBQ his creation, my heart stung. I didn't want the spotlight. I just wanted to be acknowledged, even once, for being the one who turned Dad's dream into reality. But Dad didn't see it. He only saw Jake, his golden child with the shiny degree. And no matter how hard I tried, I was still just the one who stayed. The company kept growing, but I felt like I was being pushed out of the very house I had built. By 2020, Lawson BBQ reached $50 million in revenue, a figure I once thought was impossible. Our sauce wasn't just in supermarkets anymore. It was featured in renowned BBQ restaurants from Texas to Chicago. But I was no longer the one in charge. Jake, as co-CEO, had taken all the spotlight. Jake didn't just want to lead, he wanted to erase my mark. He started calling the sauce recipe a family creation, but in interviews he claimed he had modernized it. I listened and gave a bitter smile. Modernized? He had never touched a sauce pot, never stayed up all night measuring out grams of spices, but I said nothing. I thought as long as the customers loved it, as long as the company grew, I didn't need credit. Jake didn't stop there. He excluded me from meetings with investors, saying, "Tyler's great at the warehouse, not suited for strategy." I sat in my office, hearing Jake's laughter through the thin walls, talking about the vision I had laid the foundation for. Investors nodded along, calling him a brilliant young entrepreneur. Forbes published an article about Jake titled "The Man Bringing American BBQ to the World." I read it, seeing my name mentioned only in passing, like I was just another employee. I shut my laptop, telling myself not to care, but my heart ached, as if someone were squeezing it. Dad didn't help. He grew more distant, only showing up at the old shop, avoiding major meetings. When I told him how Jake was taking credit for my work, he just said, "Tyler, don't be petty. Jake's doing well and the company's growing because of both of you." Both of us? I wanted to scream that I was the one who did everything, from the recipe to the supply chain, while Jake only knew how to stand in front of cameras. But I stayed silent. I didn't want Dad to think I was jealous. I didn't want our family to fracture. The tension simmered like a fire waiting to ignite. Jake started making decisions without consulting me, like signing a contract with a new supplier at double the cost or investing in an organic sauce line without market research. When I objected, he looked at me with disdain. "Tyler, you've stayed in Georgia your whole life. You don't understand the bigger market," he said. I clenched my fists, swallowed my anger, and kept fixing his mistakes behind the scenes. I did it for the company, for Dad, for the dream I had promised to fulfill. But I never expected everything to collapse and shatter on the day of Dad's 60th birthday. That day, I stood in a corner of the banquet hall at the Grand Hyatt in downtown Atlanta, holding a glass of wine I had no intention of drinking. I wore an old suit, feeling out of place among the expensive attire. Crystal chandeliers sparkled on the ceiling, soft jazz music played, and over 300 guests, partners, clients, family, friends, chatted and laughed lively. It was Dad's 60th birthday, but Jake had turned it into an extravagant celebration to flaunt Lawson BBQ's success. I didn't care for parties, but I was there for Dad, wanting to see him smile like he used to. I had prepared a special gift for Dad, a thick photo album chronicling Lawson BBQ's journey from a tiny wooden shack off the highway to a $50 million empire. I made it myself, selecting each photo, Dad standing by the sauce pot, me driving to deliver the first jars to Kroger, the new warehouse opening. I wanted Dad to see that everything I did was to make him proud. I planned to give it to him at the end of the night when everyone had left and it was just family. But I never imagined this party would become the worst day of my life. Jake, as usual, was the center of attention. He wore a sharp navy suit, his hair slicked back, moving through the hall, shaking hands with investors, flashing a smile like a movie star. I saw him pull Dad over to a group of VIPs, introducing him as the legendary founder, and himself as the one who brought Lawson BBQ to the world. I stood at a distance hearing those words, my heart stinging. But I told myself, let Jake shine. I just wanted Dad to be happy. Then the moment came. Jake stepped onto the podium holding a microphone, lightly tapping his glass to draw attention. The crowd fell silent, all eyes on him. Ladies and gentlemen, Jake began, his voice smooth as an actor's. Today we not only celebrate my father Henry Lawson's birthday, but also honor the legacy of Lawson BBQ, a story of vision and innovation. I smiled, thinking he'd mentioned Dad, the family recipe, the tough days we overcame together. But I was wrong, Jake continued, his voice growing more enthusiastic. When I returned from New York, Lawson BBQ was just a small company with $1 million in revenue. I worked tirelessly, modernizing the recipe, building the brand, and bringing us to $50 million today. The crowd applauded. I stood there, my grip tightening on the wine glass, feeling like someone had punched me in the chest. Modernizing the recipe? Building the brand? That was my sweat, my sleepless nights, my begging distributors for a chance. But Jake didn't mention me, not once. He scanned the room, his eyes landing on me, and the smile on his lips sent a chill down my spine. To keep growing, Jake said, we need a leader with true vision. As of today, I will be the sole CEO of Lawson BBQ. My brother Tyler has done well in the warehouse, but he's outdated, not capable of leading the company in this new era. The crowd murmured. I heard a chuckle from one corner of the room. My face burned, but my feet felt frozen. Outdated, not capable? Those words, sharp as knives, cut into my heart. I looked at Dad, hoping he'd say something, anything. He stood beside Jake, dressed in a black suit, hands in his pockets, nodding slightly. Nodding, as if he agreed with everything Jake said. As if the 10 years I sacrificed, working myself to exhaustion, fixing Jake's mistakes, setting aside my own dreams, meant nothing. The crowd applauded again, but the sound was like thunder in my head, drowning everything out. I wanted to scream, to rush the podium, grab the microphone, and tell everyone the truth, that I was the one who built Lawson BBQ, that Jake only stood on my shoulders to shine. But I didn't. I couldn't, because I saw Dad's eyes, not angry, not disappointed, but indifferent. He looked at me like I was a stranger, and that hurt the most. I set the wine glass on a table and walked out of the banquet hall. The music still played, the laughter still echoed, but I heard nothing. I passed through the hotel corridor, out onto the street where the cold Atlanta night air slapped my face. I stood under a street lamp, my hand still clutching the photo album in my coat pocket. I had meant to give it to Dad, but now I wasn't sure he'd even want it. In the darkness, I felt a small flame ignite in my chest. Not anger, not hatred, but determination. Jake and Dad thought I was outdated. They thought I wasn't capable. They were wrong. I would show them who I am, not with words, but with actions. I would make them tremble at what I did next. But for now, I just wanted to get far, far away from the glittering lights and the humiliating words still ringing in my head. 2 weeks after the nightmare of the birthday party, I booked a flight to Chicago, staring out the window at the white clouds drifting lazily by. In my coat pocket, the photo album I had meant to give Dad still sat, heavy like a reminder of everything I'd lost. 2 weeks had passed, but I could still hear Jake calling me outdated and see Dad's indifferent nod. But I didn't cry. I didn't complain. I knew what I had to do. If my family didn't need me, I would prove my worth somewhere else. I had received a call from Smoky Trails, a major food company in Chicago that produced BBQ sauces competing with Lawson BBQ. They had been watching me for a long time, knowing I was the one behind Lawson's recipe and supply chain. "Tyler, we need you," their CEO said over the phone, his voice sincere. "Come to Chicago and help us beat the competition." Competition. The word stung. Lawson BBQ was my family, 10 years of my life. But my family had turned their backs on me and I had nothing left to lose. I landed in Chicago on a drizzly day, dragging my suitcase to Smoky Trails headquarters, a sleek glass building in the heart of the city. There was no smell of wood smoke or the clatter of old machinery like in Atlanta. Everything here was bigger, more professional and colder. I was welcomed like a star, a private office, a support team, an unlimited budget. But I wasn't here to bask in it. I was here to rebuild, to prove that Jake and Dad were wrong. I started from scratch just like 10 years ago. I analyzed Smoky Trail's products and realized their sauces lacked soul. Too sweet, no smokiness, not bold enough. I proposed a new product line inspired by my grandmother's old recipe, but with a touch of black pepper and dried chilies to suit modern tastes. I worked with the product development team, spending hours in the lab testing, my eyes stinging from the spice fumes. I slept no more than 4 hours a night, but I didn't feel tired. Every new jar of sauce was a declaration. I am not outdated. I am capable. Within 6 months, Smoky Trails launched the Blaze sauce line, marketed as the authentic taste of American BBQ. I oversaw every step from production to distribution, applying every lesson I'd learned at Lawson BBQ. Blaze was an instant hit. Customers loved it. Restaurants ordered relentlessly, and Walmart, the former pride of Lawson BBQ, signed an exclusive contract with Smoky Trails for Blaze. I read the revenue reports, seeing the numbers soar, and for the first time in months, I smiled. Not because of the money, but because I knew the news would reach Jake. And it did. Lawson BBQ began losing market share. Supermarkets cut their orders, customers switched to Blaze, and an article in Food and Wine called Smoky Trails the new leader in the BBQ sauce industry. I didn't set out to sabotage the family company, but I couldn't deny the satisfaction of watching Jake scramble. He appeared on TV trying to explain that Lawson BBQ was still innovating, but his eyes betrayed his panic. I didn't contact him or Dad. I didn't need to. My success was the clearest response. But that night in my small Chicago apartment, I opened the photo album. I looked at a picture of Dad and me standing in front of the old shop, smiling brightly. My heart ached. I had proven myself, but why did I still feel empty? I closed my eyes, telling myself I didn't need my family anymore. But deep down, I knew that was a lie. A year passed. On a frigid Chicago morning, my phone rang. It was Dad's number. I hesitated, my finger hovering over the screen. I hadn't spoken to him since the night I left Atlanta. No messages, no check-ins. But I pressed the answer button because no matter how much it hurt, he was still my father. Tyler, Dad's voice was hoarse, no longer as strong as it once was. Are you doing okay? I stayed silent, waiting for him to continue. The company's in trouble, revenue's plummeting. Jake, he can't handle it. We need you to come back. His words hit me like a cold gust of wind. Come back? After everything they did? I wanted to laugh, but my throat tightened. I asked, my voice steady. Where's Jake? He's the sole CEO, isn't he? Dad sighed. Jake's trying, but he doesn't understand production, doesn't know how to keep customers. Distributors are leaving, supermarkets are canceling contracts. If this continues, Lawson BBQ will go bankrupt. I heard the tremble in his voice, and for the first time I realized he was scared, not of losing money, but of losing the legacy he'd spent his life building. Jake called me right after, his voice stripped of its usual arrogance. Tyler, listen, we need you. I was wrong. Come back, we'll share leadership. I stayed silent, letting him go on. He talked about the past few months. Warehouse cutbacks, employees quitting, customers turning away. He begged, but I could hear the reluctance in his tone. He didn't apologize for humiliating me, didn't acknowledge my contributions. He just wanted me to save him from failure. I thought all night, staring out the window at the snow falling gently on Chicago's streets. I didn't want Lawson BBQ to collapse. Despite the pain they caused, it was still Dad's dream, 10 years of my life. But I couldn't return like a defeated man, bowing to Jake and Dad. I called Dad back the next morning, my voice firm. I'll come back, but on one condition. I get 51% of the shares, making me the majority shareholder. Jake starts over as a sales rep, learning the process from the ground up. I heard Dad's sharp intake of breath, then silence. I waited, hoping he'd see my worth even just this once. Dad called back the next evening. I sat in my apartment gripping the phone, my heart pounding. I thought he'd agree, that he'd realize I was the only one who could save Lawson BBQ. But his voice was ice cold. "Tyler, who do you think you are, making demands like that? 51% of the shares? Demoting Jake to a sales rep? Are you trying to destroy this family?" I was stunned, unable to believe my ears. "Dad, I just want the company to survive. Jake can't do it, you know that." He cut me off, his voice trembling with anger. "You're a traitor, Tyler. You left, went to work for our competitor, deliberately sabotaged the family legacy. You're selfish, only thinking of yourself. Jake is my son, and he'll save the company without you." Each word was a dagger. Traitor? Selfish? I was the one who sacrificed everything, who turned Lawson BBQ into an empire, but in Dad's eyes, I was nothing. I wanted to scream, to recount the 10 years I worked myself to exhaustion, but I only said, my voice hoarse, "Dad, I just wanted to help." He snapped, "If you want to help, stop destroying us. Don't contact me again." The call ended. I sat there, staring at the phone screen, feeling like the world had crumbled. Dad, the man I'd spent my life trying to make proud, had just called me a traitor. Jake, despite his failures, was still the golden child, and I, despite my success, was still just the one who stayed. Right after Dad's call, Jake called. I answered, but before I could speak, he shouted into the phone, "Tyler, you think you're so great, working for Smoky Trails, stealing our customers? You're a traitor, but I don't need you. I'll save Lawson BBQ myself, make it bigger than ever." His voice shook, but it was still laced with arrogance, as if the company wasn't teetering on the edge of collapse, as if he wasn't the one who caused supermarkets to cancel contracts. I wanted to laugh bitterly, but I only said, my voice hoarse, "Good luck, Jake," he roared. "Don't call me again, you failure," and hung up. I sat there, staring at the darkened phone screen, feeling like the world had collapsed. Dad called me a traitor. Jake called me a failure. They, the people I'd once sacrificed everything to protect, now saw me as an enemy. I wanted to scream, to recount the sleepless nights, the times I fixed Jake's mistakes, but I couldn't. I just sat in silence, listening to the snow falling outside, and realized that family, the thing I'd once considered everything, was no longer mine. 2 years after my last conversation with Dad and Jake, I stood on a stage at Wharton, Jake's alma mater, looking out at hundreds of students in the auditorium. The spotlight shone on me, but I wasn't nervous. I had been invited to speak about the power of the underestimated, a topic I had lived through every day. Smoky Trails was now the market leader in BBQ sauce, with Blaze stocked in every major supermarket and exported to Canada. I, Tyler Lawson, once called outdated, was now the chief product officer, praised by magazines like Fortune as the mastermind behind the BBQ revolution. But this success wasn't as sweet as I had imagined. Lawson BBQ, the company I had poured 10 years of my life into building, had collapsed. Jake couldn't keep his promise to save the company himself. He invested in failed projects, lost the trust of distributors, and let employees quit in droves. Dad was forced to close multiple branches and sell the warehouse to pay off debts. An article in the Atlanta Journal-Constitution read, "Lawson BBQ, once a $50 million empire, is now just a memory." I read the article in my Chicago office, my hands trembling. I didn't want this. I only wanted to prove my worth, not destroy Dad's legacy. But Jake and Dad had chosen that path, and I couldn't save them, and I didn't contact them anymore. Dad never called back after labeling me a traitor that final time. Jake vanished from the media. No more interviews or glamorous photos. An old friend in Atlanta told me he had moved to Florida, working for a small company no one had heard of. I didn't feel vindicated. I just felt empty. The family I had once sacrificed everything to preserve was now just fragments. At Wharton, I told my story, holding nothing back about the pain. I spoke of the sleepless nights perfecting the recipe, the day I was humiliated in front of hundreds, and how I rose again in Chicago. "Success," I said, my voice hoarse, "isn't about defeating others. It's about proving your worth even when the world turns its back on you. The students applauded, but I didn't smile. I thought of Dad, of Jake, of the old shop with its wood smoke scent. I had won, but the cost was a broken family. The greatest lesson I learned wasn't about business. It was about myself. In American culture, where individualism and results are celebrated, I learned that your value doesn't lie in what others say, but in what you do. I used to think I needed Dad's or Jake's validation, but now I know. I only need to believe in myself. Every jar of Blaze on the shelf is proof of that. But sometimes when night falls, I still dream of the days when our family stirred sauce together, laughing as one. That dream I know will never return. In the middle of the night, when I jolt awake, I sit at my desk and open the photo album I once meant to give Dad. The faded pictures tell the story of Lawson BBQ. Dad by the sauce pot, me delivering the first jars to Kroger. Our smiles in front of the new warehouse. I flip through the pages, my fingers trembling, realizing that even though they turned their backs, I still love them. But I don't hate. Hatred would only drag me down, and I've come too far to turn back. And I've learned how to respond to insults, rise above with action. I don't need Dad or Jake to acknowledge me. I've proven my worth, not just to them, but to the world. Growing up for me means focusing on building the future and leaving the painful past behind. This album I'll keep, not to dwell on the pain, but to remind myself. I am Tyler Lawson, the man who turned dreams into reality despite being underestimated. And that is enough.